Yeah, when I came on last year, I had just surpassed episode 100. So it's funny, I speak to you again after hitting another milestone because I just passed episode 200. So there's the thing about milestones and Will Chase. It seems to go hand in hand with me.
Oh, it's funny you mentioned that, and congrats, by the way. It's funny you mentioned milestones because I'm writing an article. I just started it today for the First Ohio Battery website that I'm with, and I was thinking, what am I going to write about in the middle of August, towards the end of August? Hockey's dead right now. Let's look at the milestones ahead of the for the upcoming season that the Blue Jacket players might hit or what might be attainable. So it's funny that you mentioned milestones right off the bat.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Columbus. I mean, you listen. You guys had a moment out there when Johnny Hockey went out there, which shocked me. But since then, I mean, there's rumors about you guys getting Patrick Kane, though.
Yeah, I put that at negative 100. It's not going to happen. I saw the tweet. I saw it yesterday, and I forget even who it was, but it was one of the blue check marks trying to put that out there. I think on Thursday, and I asked one of our people that's kind of on the inside a little bit. I said, "What do you think?" And he was like, "Yeah, I doubt it." And I said, "Yeah, I didn't think so either. I don't know
No.
why that was even out there." Patrick Kane will start the season in Chicago. Now, whether he finishes in Chicago, who knows?
Even if Chicago eats half the cap, they still don't have enough money to get him on the payroll. And I don't really think the Rangers need him as it is. I mean, I'm not underestimating Patrick Kane. I don't care for him personally, and he has his off the ice issues that make me not care for him personally. But I can't deny, separating the player from the person. I can't deny his talent. He's a Hall of Famer, first ballot. So would he help the Rangers exponentially? Yeah, especially given the chemistry with Panarin. But it's a money thing strictly with him. And I could see Edmonton doing it. I mean, imagine him on a line with McDavid and Draisaitl wouldn't even be fair.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think he's going to be traded, especially before the season. And like you said, whether it's Edmonton, I think we've seen Toronto mentioned. I was talking with Dan Schulman of ESPN, of course, and the Blue Jays broadcaster earlier, and I always love to be like, and I wasn't trying to like rub it in anyone's face about the Leafs, but I was like, hey, they're going for this, they might do it. And he was laughing and he was like, they might win the cup. They may not even get out of the first round. And sure enough, couldn't even get out of the first round. And they had maybe their best chance because they destroyed Tampa in game 1 5-zip. They were up 3-2 in the series. But I mean, I was riding Tampa Bay all the way through the end. I was thinking, even though the Avalanche are great, I'm taking Tampa Bay. It didn't happen. Of course, the Avs are great. And I'm not surprised with how it all culminated.
Yeah, that's why, you know what, when the Rangers, even though I was disappointed in the moment when the Rangers fell short in the conference finals, I know in my heart of hearts that even at their best, they wouldn't have had enough to beat Colorado. Colorado was a team on a mission. So I'm like, it's kind of better that they had the run end there. Because I know whoever was coming out of the East, even for a team like Tampa that won the last two cups, say what you will about them, nobody really had a shot against Colorado. And it's amazing to see a team that deep in the salary cap era, because I think back to the last Colorado Avalanche team that won the cup in 2001. No salary cap. They had Ray Bork and Rob Blake on the same blue line, to give you context of how loaded they were. And that was just their defense pairing. I mean, obviously Adam Foote, another legend, Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, Alex Tanguay, Milan Hajduk. So to see a team with basically similar offensive talent, McKinnon, Rantanen, Newhook, Burakovsky, and all these guys together. Burakovsky, I know, just left to Seattle, but to have a team with that much offensive talent on a roster that has salary cap restrictions and implications, I found that to be a testament to Joe Sakic's abilities as a GM. And it's worth noting, not many guys, you're starting to see the tide turn here, and I like this, have been able to make the transition from being a great player to being a great executive. Jerry West was the barometer. He was the gold standard across sports of somebody who was a great player and then was an equally great executive, especially with what he did with the Lakers. To see Sakic now go, and follow the same mold, hell of a player, two-time Stanley Cup champion, Hart Trophy winner. Now he wins a Stanley Cup as a GM. Even Rob Blake in LA, he just did a fantastic job rebuilding the Kings. They're ready to compete again. You're starting to see these executives, man, these former players start to become wise to the front office as well. Who could forget Steve Eiserman, too?
Right, Steve Yzerman, of course. Yeah, I mean, he built Tampa Bay up pretty much to what they are now. It is fun. It's cool to see the Red Wings and the Avalanche. I mean, whether or not you like those teams or not, it's cool to see that rivalry that was on the ice when those two are playing. Now it's potentially forming from the top of those two guys that are, putting those teams together. Of course, Colorado is the best team in hockey, and Detroit is trying to get back up to relevancy, and they are making that step.
I hate them being in the East, though. It doesn't feel right to me. I don't like them in the East at all. They belong in the West. It just, I miss that rivalry. I wish, if Arizona were to ever just decide, listen, it's not working, and just relocate out East and become, I don't know, the Quebec Nordiques again or something like that, which will never happen in a million years. Because Gary Bettman doesn't want to put another team in Canada. We're damn sure not getting a team in Hartford either anytime soon. So that said, I mean, maybe you could put the Wings out west. I know because it was a time zone, they wanted to play more games in their time zone, but I don't like it. I need to see them go head to head again. And it's funny, you're right. Iserman and Sakic, who were two very classy guys as players and as people, they were captains for both teams during the heated portion of that rivalry in the late '90s, early 2000s.
So I was born in '88. So I was, that 8 to 10, 11, I guess that frame or that time frame for me. So I was young, but I definitely remembered the rivalry, but I didn't remember maybe all the specifics, such as maybe the Darren McCarty, Claude Lemieux angle. And those specifics and what really drove that rivalry or fueled it and made it what it was essentially. So maybe I didn't remember all the specific. Whenever I think back on those two teams back in the late '90s, I always just remembered all the brawls between both teams. But now I have the context to remember, like, oh yeah, there's a reason why it got to what it did.
I loved it because I had seen, I mean, the benefit, we have YouTube now, which is such a time machine. You could go back and see anything as it happened, and it's permanently archived there, which I love. Old ball games, historical events. I mean, we're coming up, for example, the 21st anniversary of 9/11. And if anybody, for all the young kids out there, want to have an idea, for example, of what happened that day, YouTube is a treasure trove for something like that. So to see that documentary after having watched all the old games and clips on YouTube was great because it really did. I didn't know that. I forgot. I knew they played together at Jersey, Brendan Shanahan and Claude Lemieux. I didn't know they were good friends. And again, Shanny, who's one of my favorite Rangers ever, he was with the Rangers for a couple of years towards the end of his career. He was such a focal point of those Wings Cups teams in 97, 98, and '02, and that rivalry. Who could forget him jumping up in midair and colliding with Patrick Waugh at center ice at Fight Night at the Joe back in '97? But I love that. And I have to say, I told this to a good buddy of mine. I blame Detroit for where hockey is now. That lockout in '04, '05 that changed the sport as we know it. It's Detroit's fault because that 2002 team, which basically capped the rivalry, because during that time frame, 96 to '02, there's only one team, no, two teams that won the cup that weren't named Detroit and Colorado, and that was New Jersey in 2000 and Dallas the year before in '99. And, obviously Colorado wins 96 and '01, Detroit 97, 98, '02. That '02 team had 10 Hall of Famers on it, if you count Datsuk, who's going to go to the Hall of Fame when he retires. On one team, Robitaille and Hull were on the fourth line. All right. And you had Hasek and Net. So to put a team together like that, again, no salary cap, that's when Gary Bettman probably said, all right, enough of this, and that's why we have what we have now with the cap, which I hate.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know. I guess if they didn't have a cap, sure. I mean, then teams could just do whatever they wanted essentially. But I'm so used to the cap now in sports. And I mean, I know baseball doesn't have a hard cap, but they teams have more or less like to try to operate somewhat with
It's
a budget
self-imposed.
restraint. Right. I mean, everyone has a budget, but yeah, I mean, I wonder what the Blue Jackets would have done without a cap now. I mean, they just signed Gaudreau, of course, and they had to move out Bjorkstrand, which kind of sucked because Oliver Bjorkstrand's been a really good player for them. And I know a lot of people are kind of wondering, like, why did they sign Eric Goodbranson to be a defenseman who might be on the third pairing and he's on a 4-year deal, and
Yeah, he
more or
stinks.
less maybe him and Goudreau are good buddies, and maybe that was kind of the White Sox. Maybe they were trying to do what the White Sox tried to do with bringing in Manny Machado's,
Yeah,
like,
they signed John
right, or
Jay.
whoever, or was it John Jay, or there's someone else I'm trying to think of. I can't remember his name, but it doesn't even matter. He's not even in baseball anymore. But I saw him on TV on the Apple TV baseball broadcast. He was one of the like post game people, so he's not even playing anymore. But the point is, maybe they would have been able to. Obviously, they would have been able to keep a guy like Bjorkstrand around without trading him to Seattle as a salary dump. But like you said at the top, Goudreau, I was shocked. That all came together out of nowhere because free agency started, and we thought this team, they're not going to make any major additions. I even wrote an article, I think a couple of us did, saying, don't expect much in free agency. They'll probably sign somebody. No one thought he'd be the best player in hockey, essentially, or at least one of the best coming off of last season. Hockey season, it feels like it just ended, and here we are less than 50 days away from the new season starting. This is the Rangers team that was just trying to get into the playoffs. When we talked a year ago, that was what your goal was for this team, was to even just get into the playoffs, let alone go all the way to the Eastern Conference final. What is a realistic mindset for a team now? Because now, yeah, if you go to the playoffs and lose in the first or second round, it's going to feel like a disappointing year because you didn't even get all the way back to the Eastern Conference final. But did last year come too, and I don't want to say too soon, but was it too much too soon? And now it's like, oh, heightened expectations, or hey, it's New York City. We have all these great players. We should go all the way back to the final anyway.
I think it's the latter, honestly. And listen, there was kind of that with the 2017 Yankees that nobody was expecting them to do that. Go all the way to game seven of the ALCS, and they fell short to a much better Houston team, obviously. Cheating aside, I mean, that team, even without all that controversy, was a better roster than the Yankees had at the time. And that put the Yankees in a position where it's like, oh man, we got to really upgrade this roster. So they went out and they got Stanton. And the pieces back then didn't fit. Gary Sanchez, obviously, was a bust and a half, and that was the beginning of his end in New York. Thankfully, he's gone, and I don't have to deal with him anymore. And it kind of pushed him into a position where they mismanaged that roster for a couple years, got pretty far. I love that 2019 squad that got to the LCS and was a pitcher short, I think, of going to the World Series. And we'll see what happens with them this year. They're starting to pick back up again after a lengthy slump. But with the Rangers, I think they're in a better position because they've managed it better to this point than what Brian Cashman did. They needed a second line center. I was hoping personally they'd get Evgeny Malkin because you could have given him a lot of money on a short-term deal, given the fact he's older. He's in Pittsburgh now, Pittsburgh rather, for the next few years. Obviously, back with them. That's going to run its course pretty quickly. They're getting older. They're still pretty good, but the deal they gave to Malkin's going to look awful at the end. Same thing with Chris Letang. So they'll ride that core until they've got nothing left of it. So it's whatever. But to get Trocheck, who was a 50-point player on the second line, is very valuable. Obviously, seeing Philip Hedl. My thing is the young guys. Philip Hedl had a massive breakout in the playoffs. He was mid at best during the regular season, was money in the playoffs. Does he build on that? Capo Caco, we've been waiting for him to take off. We've seen the glimpses of Lafreniere. Keandre Miller's arrived, no doubt about him. He's here. Adam Fox, no doubt about him. So I think there's enough there. Plus, you got a reigning Vezina winner in Igor Net and a better defensive core than Henrik Lundqvist ever had in front of him, in front of Igor now. That I think it's a competitive conference. I think Toronto is still a threat if they can get out the first round even more so. Tampa's not going away. Obviously they're coming off 3 straight Cup finals. You have other teams as well that are obviously trying to make a push that you have to keep an eye on. The Capitals are still very deadly. The Bruins, I think, have one more run in them. The Panthers are the reigning President's Trophy winners, and they finally got out the first round before they got the doors blown off them by Tampa. So it's a competitive conference. Is it a given? No. But do I feel that they have the talent necessary to go all the way? Yes. And I think this next 3 years, realistically speaking, is their window. If they don't at least get back to the Cup final for the first time since 2014 in the next 3 years, it's a failure. But I think this is the team to finally do what hasn't been done since Messier and company in 1994, and that's win the Cup.
So at least they have to at least get back to the Eastern Conference Final this year, right? I mean, they have to.
Yeah, they have enough talent, and obviously now there's a little bit more stability and direction. They have a new captain, which they hadn't had in a number of years in Trouba. And I know there was a lot of controversy about that pick. I think it's fine. Kreider probably didn't want the C. Neither did Mika. There's a lot of pressure that comes with wearing that C. Some guys do really well with it. I mentioned Mark Messier. He embraced it. He's the greatest captain the New York Rangers have ever had, obviously. Other guys didn't. Brian Leach did not do well as captain. He was much better as an alternate captain. Jaromir Jagr, on the other hand, who's one of my favorite Rangers as well, he did, even though he didn't want the captaincy at first. Once he started wearing that C, he was great. Ryan McDonough, later on, much later, not so much. So I think Trouba will do fine with it. But realistically speaking, is Kreider going to score 52 goals again? Probably not, So you have to understand that what you saw last year was the exception to the rule, but still, you'll probably get a 30-goal season out of him. Panarin will still be a 90-point player. Mika still be an 80-point player as he was the previous year. So barring any kind of catastrophic injury, and again, now with the centering addition of Trocheck for the second line specifically, a significant upgrade over Strome, who I liked, but time to say goodbye. They have enough there. And they upgraded their backup goalie situation, too. Georgiev stunk. He can be fine in Colorado. He can go and hide in Colorado now with that team in front of him. He could chill out, so he's good. That's probably better for him. But to bring in Halak, who's been a very capable backup and starter, backed up Tuukka Rask for a number of years in Boston too, as well as Louis Domingue as a third stringer. I like that a lot. So I really hope it's been too long. I think New York is primed for a championship from any of the teams. Remember, we haven't had a championship in the city since the Giants beat the Patriots a second time a decade ago. That's 11 years ago now, 2012, that they did that. So we're due for a championship. Either it's going to be the Yankees, the Mets, or the Rangers to deliver it in the next 3 years.
Igor Shesterkin, can he do what he did last year, or is he going to have a bit of a
Regression?
yeah?
No, I mean I don't anticipate a sophomore slump with him. I think this is his first real year to be the starter because there was, I mean, obviously last season was the weird 56 game season. Before that, he only started a handful of games because Henrik was still in net, and that was an odd situation because everybody knew Henrik was basically on his way out the door. But that was his first year to get his feet under him in the NHL. And I think he's already been doing this. Remember, he was doing this in Russia. He's doing this now. He's used to the pressure. He doesn't mind the pressure. So I feel that that works out perfectly for him. And listen, I mean, are you going to see him go and put up maybe the same numbers? Maybe, maybe not. But I think he's got the temperament and certainly the talent to backstop the Rangers for the next decade and do it admirably. I mean, obviously, you're only as good as the team in front of you, too. We saw this towards the tail end of Mike Richter's career. Mike was a great goalie, obviously. His jersey's hanging in the rafters for a reason. But once those teams got mediocre and the defensive core in front of them wasn't as good, it hurt his numbers. Same thing to an extent with Henrik. You know, I feel that there's no reason why Igor shouldn't be able to successfully backstop.
So shifting to New York baseball, so obviously both the Mets and the Yankees are in first place in their divisions. The Mets lead has kind of shrunk a little bit. Obviously, the Yankees lead shrunk a little, but they're still up, pretty significantly after a pretty bad last few weeks. I mean, that team lost, what was it, 16 of 20, or I don't know. Do you think that the morale was shaken once they traded a guy like Jordan Montgomery, who has just been like pretty much perfect? You had to trade Joey Gallo. He doesn't have the focus on him necessarily, and he's been lighting it up. Do you think that everything is back to where it was, or are you still are you concerned, or were you thinking, whatever, get to October and then we'll see what they really are made of?
Well, I was telling my friends, it's just, okay, you have to go through a slump at some point. Even the best teams go through them. And better to go through it now than obviously towards the end of September. You want to go into the playoffs on a high note. So I'm like, all right, get it out of their system. Play the crappy baseball you're playing. It has to turn itself around eventually. And it seems like it's starting to turn itself around now. They saved some face, obviously winning that last game with the Blue Jays here. I think it was huge, though, for them to sweep the Mets at home after last month. I mean, all the games in the Subway Series this year, except for that first one that Montgomery got lit up, and that was his last start with the Yankees, all the games were close and competitive. So for them to defend home turf, the Mets won on their home turf, the Yankees won on theirs. For them to get those two games, especially the Scherzer game, was a huge morale booster. And right now they have 7 games against Oakland and the Angels, respectively. There's no reason they shouldn't at least take 3 or 4 from Oakland. There's no reason they shouldn't take at least 2 or 3 from LA. I don't expect them to sweep LA because they do, to be fair, have Trout and Ohtani on that team. So it's a little bit more difficult to sweep them. But the Yankees should emerge from this West Coast swing at least 5-2, if not 6-1. I don't expect them to go 7-0. And you got to get right against somebody. And for me, do I feel, objectively speaking, that this roster that started out 61-23 has the means to defeat Houston? No, I'll believe it when I see it. If they're matched up in an ALCS against Houston, Houston's winning again. This has been a one-sided rivalry. I'm sorry. I'm a Yankee fan. I would love to be wrong. Houston's a better team right now. It's kind of like, what's a good example? I wouldn't say Yankees Red Sox back in the day, but I guess a good comp is the Yankees in Seattle or the Yankees in Oakland back in the day. Oakland had these great teams with Giambi and Tejada, Mulder, Hudson, Zito. Back-to-back years, ran into the Yankees. Yankees, even though they were a little bit older, they knew how to win. They were battle-tested, beat them. Seattle with Olerud and Cameron and Buhner and Ichiro, same thing. So it's kind of the same scenario now. But I do obviously, looking at their current situation, looking at their schedule up ahead, I think they're turning the corner. Obviously, getting Stanton back was huge. He was missed. So I like I like the direction they're heading in. This is a team that's going to win 90 plus games, if not 100. So I think for now, there's no cause for concern. My thing is just get to the postseason, get out the first round, and let's see if you can pull off a miracle against Houston.
Well, they're paying Garrett Cole to be the ace, and he is basically the ace. But do you trust him in October?
No, I'm still pissed off at him for last year. I told my brother, I said I do not, I still haven't forgiven him for last year. I mean, if the fact what losing in the wild card game, as if that wasn't bad enough, on the road against the Red Sox, Fenway Park, to not even make it out the third inning, second inning. I think he got knocked out in the second inning earlier than that. That I'm still ticked off at him about. So I remember there were comparisons, before the Spider Tack controversy came out, and he hasn't been the same since that. About Cole Degrom Cole, who's the best days? It's Degrom. And I know Degrom's had injury history, obviously, but when he's on, there's nobody that can touch him. So if you gave me a game 7 right now for my life, I gotta win it. I gotta have a World Series championship. I'm throwing DeGrom out there. I don't trust Cole. Would I like Cole to shut me up and go out there and have a big October? Yeah. But I mean, I liken it to Clemens. When Clemens first got to New York, right? And Clemens was a little older. He was 37 when he was traded to the Yankees. People had the same thing with him. They didn't trust him over guys like El Duque or guys like Coney and Andy Pettit. It wasn't until Clemens went out there, really in the 2000 postseason, Game 4, Seattle Mariners, ALCS, gave up one hit, struck out 15 guys, and then went out in the World Series and pitched his butt off, and then went out the next year, won a Cy Young, and was money in the playoffs that year too. That people said, all right, we can trust him. You got to earn that anywhere, but you especially have to earn that in New York, and he hasn't earned it.
Who do you trust with the final few outs in a critical playoff game?
Oh, Holmes, I guess he was hurt, so I give Holmes a pass. Listen, he was great last year as a setup man, and he's been great for the most part this year. Every closer, even Mariano, nothing I'm comparing Clay Holmes to Mariano. Every closer, though, even the best of them go through their stretches where they're not as sharp. It's a product of human nature, especially when you factor in, obviously, the fact that even the worst teams, they're major leaguers for a reason, right? So when I look at Clay Holmes, I wasn't surprised that he was going to regress to the mean. You can't have a whole year where your ERA is under 1. I knew eventually he was going to hit a bump in the road. Now he's on an IL stint. He'll come back and see what he can do. I want no part of Chapman in a high leverage situation. If the game's a blowout or whatever, and it's the 8th inning and you're up 9-2 or whatever, yeah, fine, throw him out there. If it's a 1-run, 2-run game and you need him to get 3 important outs, I want no part of him. And hopefully, they say goodbye to him at the end of the
Oh
year.
yeah. To go back to the Mariano Holmes thing, there was the scoreless streak when he broke Mariano's record earlier this season.
He's a nice story, and he's a nice guy, and he deserved to be an all-star this year. He's easy to root for, and listen, I understood. I wasn't pissed at him when he was going through his struggles. I mean, it happens sometimes. Like I said, the best closers are going to hit bumps in the road. Look at Diaz. Diaz went through his first couple of years. It took him a while to get to a certain level, and this year he's lighting it up.
So, yeah, I remember last season we were talking about, do you trust Cashman or Aaron Boone? Has your opinion on at least Aaron Boone changed at all, or are you still basically, I don't trust it until they win in October?
I think Boone's doing the best he can, honestly. I think again, Aaron Boone, he's come in the first year he won 100 games, and you could say it's the roster in front of him, but the roster's only as good as what the general manager pieces together. I don't like the way Brian Cashman constructs teams. I think he thinks that in constructing teams that he knows more, that he's better than you, and that you have no idea what you're talking about, and that his formula works. It's basically Napoleon complex is what I've called it, and it hasn't. You have way too many right-handers in that lineup. You don't have enough starting pitching. You don't have, and I understand it's not easy to put together the caliber of rotation that Houston has and develop pitchers and understand that. And I understand that maybe the market's not what it used to be in previous years. But still, the idea that this current iteration of the New York Yankees can go out there and win a World Series as they're currently constructed, I don't buy it. But you know what? He's got job security like nobody's business, and that's why I feel he's kind of gotten
Yeah.
complacent.
If this team doesn't lose Matt Carpenter of all people, if they don't lose him to that injury, does this team go through the slide that we saw them go through? You wouldn't think that would be the main reason, or maybe even a reason why that would happen, but it kind of happened about the same time. I think they were already kind of struggling in Seattle when that happened. But once they get him back, assuming he's back, probably by October anyway.
Yeah, he'll be back probably next month. No, that was amazing. I think honestly, it started with them losing Stanton. Once Stanton went down, that was the first blow. And obviously, you miss him in the lineup. And I give him a ton of credit because, listen, myself included, we rode that guy hard when he came to New York, and we rode him especially for that 2018 postseason where he was miserable against the Red Sox in the LDS. He was injured in 2019. People were talking about preferring Mike Talkman over him of all people in the lineup, but he came into his own. And really, last year, I don't count the pandemic season, he never complained about the criticism. He owned up to it. He owned up to his shortcomings. And now you don't want him out of the lineup. You complain when he's not in the lineup because he's become such an integral part of this team, and he's finally producing at the level that we all thought he would. So losing him was the big thing, and obviously Carpenter too, because It would be one thing if you could at least turn to somebody else in that lineup to replace him, but Josh Donaldson's been horrible. I mean, you didn't really focus on it too much when they were 61 and 23 and they were winning games left and right. But once they started to slump, that's when you've seen him defensively. Yeah, he's been fine. You're not paying the guy to be Ray Ordonez. You're not paying him for his glove. You're paying him for his bat, and he hasn't delivered.
What do you think about IKF at shortstop, or really shortstop in general?
Ordonez. That's basically what, and I was expecting that from him. I'm not complaining. I think he's been fine. He is what he is. He's basically come to New York and done exactly what he's done his entire career. He'll run into a ball every now and then and send it out. He's good for about 30 to 40 RBIs. His glove hasn't been as good, but it hasn't been I think people overblow it. They make it way worse than what it is with his glove. He hasn't been as good as he was in Texas, but he hasn't been a butcher out there either. He's fine. He's getting paid to be what he is. The problem, I've said this before, and I was just talking about Ordonez the other day because I have his jersey. The problem when you have a guy like that in your lineup is when you don't have great hitters to shield him. To go back to him, when you were in a lineup with guys like John Olerud, Edgardo Alfonso, Robin Ventura, Mike Piazza, Ricky Henderson, Jay Payton, Benny Akbayani, you don't notice it as much. You can live with it because there's great hitters to make up for it. Same thing with IKF. But when guys go down, or maybe when the talent pool on the team isn't as good, that's when those guys start to kill you because they're not good for a big hit. And I'm not expecting that from IKF, but to be fair, he's had big hits this year.
Do you think the Yankees keep Aaron Judge?
They'd be crazy not to. I thought that they would trade for Juan Soto. I'm like, if they would have traded for Juan Soto, which I wasn't mad at them for doing, even though, again, they could have gotten Soto for a bag of chips, it seems. I'm not knocking the prospects that San Diego sent to Washington, but I thought the package would be a heck of a lot more than what it was, but it wasn't. So I thought if they got him, then it makes letting go of Judge easier. But yes, he's 30. Yes, he's going to be 31 next year, and that's always difficult. And we see more and more GMs refusing to hand out longer term deals, at least for the most part. Harper and Machado being the most recent exceptions. Yeah, to tease Julio Rodriguez, which just happened yesterday, obviously. But he's young. I mean, these guys like, 2021, so it makes sense to pay him that many years. But with a guy who's 30, it's a little tough. I thought the offer they gave him at the start was fair. 8 years, 233. That wasn't a bad contract at all. I can't kill Cashman for that. But it's going to be a hell of a lot more difficult now to pay him because he's making it so hard. But how can you let him leave? He's an MVP. He's going to win MVP.
Yeah. So you still have the Judge thing. What about a guy like Carlos Correa? He's probably going to opt out. So you think he'll stay in Minnesota? You think he'll go elsewhere? What about, I was talking with someone earlier, actually, and he threw Baltimore. This was about a month or so ago. This was before we saw Baltimore. I mean, they were already like a 500 team at that point. Do you think Baltimore steps up and gets a guy like Carlos Correa to kind of essentially put him over the top a little bit, or at least try to?
It would make sense because the Yankees, they want Oswaldo Cabrera to be their shortstop of the future, it would seem. I mean, I have Anthony Volpe coming up through the pipeline too, so they'll probably have Cabrera play that position for a while, then move him to another position, I guess, and then have Volpe come up and be that guy. So they have two prospects they're very high on that have made that decision basically non-existent. I guess it would make sense for Baltimore to do that because there always is that one signing that tells the other guys in that locker room, oh, okay, they believe in us. We're ready to move into that next phase now and contend. He fits him like a glove, no pun intended.
Yeah, I think it could make sense, and it's cool to see them basically arrive essentially, and they're not even haven't even arrived yet really, but they're at least going to have a winning season. It looks like really cool to see them turn it around pretty fast. But relatively speaking, it's been a little bit of it's been a few years actually. Great segue. Buck Showalter, of course, was the last guy to help take that team. Here he is with the Mets. Now, it's funny. I want to mention this. So I didn't think about it last year at the time, and I completely agree with you on your assessment of Buck Showalter because he's been a guy that he's never won the World Series, but he's been so close. He's always had teams like the Orioles, the Mets now. He's always been able to get these teams, even the Yankees back in the mid-90s.
Respectability.
At the time,
yeah,
if I had thought about it, I would have only pushed back on this one thing, more tongue in cheek than anything, because I still agree with you. But I remembered you were saying, last year, if he was the next manager of the Yankees, he would have been the guy to been like, hey, you guys haven't won anything yet. And technically, he hasn't either. However, I do agree with you because he has been very good as a manager, a baseball person. And here he is with the Mets, and he's been a guy that the Mets needed, obviously. So, yeah, I agree. I completely agree with you on Showalter in general. Are we looking at a Subway Series? I mean, who knows? Anything could happen. You just said earlier that maybe Houston is still better.
it could be, but also I think the Dodgers, the Dodgers are on. They're like the Avalanche to me. They're on a mission because they feel really. Again, the COVID season was weird, and that's not their fault. You can't do anything about a global catastrophe. But they feel that really they should have more than one ring. They felt they should have won it last year. They probably should have. They felt they should have won it in 2019. They definitely should have. And obviously, those two World Series they lost to Boston and Houston, respectively, they should have. They had Game 7 at home for crying out loud in 17. So I feel like this is kind of the year, especially now with Freeman, and they don't have a single hole in that lineup. And even with Walker Buehler being out for as long as he is, and Kershaw being up and down with the durability issues that he's had throughout his career, they feel like this is their year. And why shouldn't they? I mean, they're closer to 100 wins than they are to 50 losses, which is insane to say. I mean, the pace they're on right now is ridiculous. They're 50 games over 500. So if the Mets can get by them, if they're able to get out the first round, which I think they should with that talent pool they have. If the Yankees can get by Houston, yeah, and I think it would be. Remember the 2000 World Series, even though the Yankees were the better team on paper, it was still a very close series. Only went 5 games, but each game was close. There was no blowout in any of those games. Each game went right down the wire. You'd see that on steroids, if they were to meet up.
You were mentioning at the top that you just had 200 episodes. So talk about the podcast.
Well, certainly, anytime you're speaking with I just had, for example, Chief Joe Pfeiffer for my 200th episode, who was the first chief into the World Trade Center from the FDNY on 9/11. So, and I've been chasing him for about 5 years. Finally getting him was great. And he was particularly good to talk to. I mean, there's so many of them. Because, I mean, listen, I was saying this on my show last night with the retired street crime detective. You could just be a police officer or fireman in New York, never move up the ranks, never become a detective or lieutenant or captain in either department. No detectives in the FDNY, obviously, but the point still stands. You could just stay at one rank and have more than your fair share of stories and fun and crazy, holy crap moments across a minimum of a 20-year career. But I think talking to the guys in the emergency service unit, which for those of you that don't know, that are not from New York, the emergency service unit of the NYPD is not like your conventional SWAT team. You see teams out across the country, they're SWAT and they're strictly SWAT. They only handle high leverage, highly dangerous criminal situations. In New York, the emergency service unit also does that, but they're half SWAT, half rescue. So if you have somebody that's on top of the Brooklyn Bridge threatening to jump, ESU cops are the ones that are going to go bring them down. If a building collapses and people are trapped, ESU cops alongside firemen are in there making the rescue. Somebody gets pinned in a car after an accident, ESU cops are making the extrication. So when you're talking to those guys and hearing their stories, not just of major events, but other things that maybe made headlines or maybe didn't, but that were major events in their respective careers, it's crazy. I remember talking to my buddy Lieutenant Ray McCormack from my Best of the Bravest FDNY miniseries. That guy was in one of the craziest rescues in FDNY history. It's a roof rope rescue, which is when they literally strap a guy into a rope and lower him down the side of a building. And this was a 14-story high rise. Two guys, the top floor of the building. This is back in 1991. Was it was a record label, was a record company. So you have all this vinyl and stuff burning, which exacerbates the fumes, which exacerbates the fire as it is. And these two guys were going to jump. And they lowered down. Ray was hanging onto the rope for dear life. They lowered down Kevin Shea from Rescue One. They get these two guys out. Hearing that story was incredible. I did an interview for my Bomb Squad miniseries, Tales from the Boom Room, with a couple of my buddies about a job in 1997. These two guys from Hamas were gonna blow up the Atlantic Avenue subway, and they sent emergency service in to do the raid on these two guys. These two guys went and reached for the bombs to set them off. As they kicked down the door, they shot them both. Didn't kill them, but shot them both a combined 7 times. And then the bombs are still there. So the guys from the bomb squad had to go in and take care of the bombs and defuse them. So those stories, there's too many of them to pick one singular episode, but just to be on a first name basis with these guys, which is what I think I said last year, is incredible. Wow, these guys are really my friends. They did all this crazy junk. I could live a million lives, and I don't think I'll ever do anything as crazy as some of these guys.
Yeah, that is really cool. Do you have any specific episodes coming up that you can share, or what's on tap?
Well, last night I had Richie Ficken, who was in Street Crime. That unit doesn't exist anymore in the NYPD. He was around from 71 to '02, and that unit was part of the Special Operations Division. You're in plain clothes. You don't look like a cop. You got a beard on. You grow a beard. You got long hair and whatnot. And you're literally spotting patterns. This guy might have a bulge in his waist. That might be a gun. This guy's really walking around that lady for a good while. Maybe he's thinking about assaulting her, raping her, robbing her. So hearing his stories was great if you want to check that out. I'd still do my news and sports interviews. I got Rena Ninen, who is a veteran of CBS and ABC News, coming up on Monday. We're going to confirm that with her. I don't have a guest for Tuesday right now. I'm scrambling to find one. But some good shows on tap for sure. Still in the NYPD FDNY theme, and hopefully I can get some big names on the news side to come on. I'm still working on Lester Holt. I think I mentioned last year
Yeah.
I was
I
working
think
on
you
him.
did remember mention him. Didn't you also get a job? I don't remember specifically, but didn't it have to do with like an ambulance or something within that?
It was a ride along with the emergency service where I I reached out to the NYPD and I said, "Can I do a ride along with ESU?" Luckily for me, the sergeant who got my request in the Office of Public Information, he knew me already. He knew my show. He enjoyed my show, so he said, "I watch you," which was left me flabbergasted that somebody that high up actually pays attention to my program. But he said, sure, we can do it. And even though we didn't see any jobs that day, they felt bad for me. So they'll say, come back, we'll put you in the Bronx and one of the trucks in the Bronx, which is always active these days. I got to interview a lot of guys from Truck One and Truck Two, and those guys are the best of the best. And I think what struck me is at Truck Two, which for those of you who don't know is in I think the northern end of Manhattan, which is Harlem. They're in Harlem. I went into the room where they have all the pictures of the alumni, and the first thing that caught me is there's 4 memorial plaques there. Three of the guys that got killed on 9/11, and I didn't know them personally, but I know guys that work with them: John Delera, Sergeant Mike Curtin, and Detective Joe Vigiano. And just seeing the old pictures of them at work and the things they did over the years, it was a humbling thing, And I got a shirt. I should have worn it for the podcast. It's upstairs from those guys from Two Trucks. So that was great. That was a great experience, and I turned it into a little documentary. It's on my YouTube channel, and hopefully I can go back soon and do something with the fellas from the Bronx and Trucks 3 and 4. Good to be back on the show. Like I said, a lot has happened since you and I last spoke. I've seen your show and the interviews that you've been doing, and I can appreciate the hustle. I can. I didn't quite know what direction I wanted to take my show in when I first brought it back in 2020, and that's something I mentioned last year. But to just have the opportunity to find your footing as you go. Do I see myself doing the show forever? No, I'll probably take a lengthy break just to recharge my batteries at the end of the year and just do other stuff for a while. But it is something that I can look back on with whatever endeavor I move on to next at some point in my 20s. I'm 22. I'll be 23 in February, and say this shaped me. And I'm sure you feel the same way when you look at how many episodes you've done. You're like, holy crap, how did I get here? But we fly by the seat of our pants, Will. Nobody's coming to get us but us. We're the content creators. It's the buck stops with us. We're the executive producers. We're the bookers. We're the on-air talent. But I really appreciate what you're doing. I admire your work ethic, and I'm glad that we're both still around a year later doing what we're doing.